Okay, this is Mr. M, and this video will explain to you how to solve a literal equation. Literal equations are simply equations that have multiple variables. These are equations that are used in the real world to solve various problems. Some equations you see in a worksheet or on a platform like this may not be used in the real world, but some equations are. So equations for finding distance, some equations you'll see from physics later on. The idea is you're going to use two tools. They're called officially additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. Basically, it's the idea that if you're trying to separate variables, you're going to either add or subtract something, and that would be the additive inverse, with subtraction is included under that, or you're going to multiply or divide. So let me copy this equation again, and they tell us to solve for t in terms of the other variables. What that looks like is you have an equation and there's always going to be two sides. You look for the variable they want you to solve for. In this case, this is t. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of any other variables that's next to it. Remember that if you see letters side by side like this, in math, we're taking a shortcut. We mean multiplication. We just don't write it like this. And we certainly don't write it like this. Since in algebra, a variable, x is a common variable that's used to represent a number. So you have to remember that what's going on this right side, where the variable t is at, because whatever they're asking you to solve for, that's where your focus should be. You're multiplying. So then you just have to think, what's the opposite of multiplication? It's division. So simply divide by the variables we need to get rid of. And if we divide on one side, we need to divide on the other side. So we divide these out. A lot of times teachers will say cancel. That's fine. You end up with the variable t by itself, and this fraction right here will be your answer. So p times v over n times r. Okay, so this is a level 2 problem. So with literal equations, you'll have a challenge that you have with regular equations, namely fractions. Now, fractions aren't hard. You may think they're hard because of a bad experience you had in elementary or middle school or elementary school when you learn fractions. You have to get comfortable with them. They're just fractions. They're no big deal. So there are multiple ways you can approach this. To be consistent with what I said you should do for regular equations, if you want to get rid of a variable or a fraction in the equation, multiply by the least common denominator. In this case, we only have one fraction, so the least common denominator is v. So let's get rid of that variable or that fraction by multiplying by that variable. And we're going to use v. So then we're going to do v times u, which is vu, my equal sign, v times this fraction. And what I'm going to be left with is just the numerator, which is 1. Now I'm going to write the 1, but it's just 1. And if you multiply by 1, that doesn't change the product t by itself. So you have to look at this and realize that the variable s needs to go. So we're going to divide by s, but if we divide by s on the right side, we have to do the same thing on the left side. These s's cancel out. So then you have this as your answer. So either you can switch it around if you want. So you have t equals vu, which is to say v times u divided by s, and then you're done.